So just to sort of go through a bit of scene setting here, I'm going to run through a bit of a narrative as I introduce Trust Monitor, just to help paint a picture of the problem that we're solving. We have some great examples in here that everyone should be able to follow, no matter where you are in your security journey. If you're a customer, I'm looking forward to showing you how these tools fit in. If you're considering AppCheck as a security partner, I'm sure you'll appreciate the extra depth that we go to in our detection capabilities. So just to set the scene here, you've built an application, you've deployed an application for your business, or it could be several applications, or it could be an application you're delivering for a customer. You've done everything right, it's all working. You log into you've logged monitoring, you've got user tracking, you've followed every best practice and introduced SDLC across the business, doing proper risk assessments, threat modeling, code review, security testing, having those assessments feed back into the application at the same time as well. You've been careful in your planning and established a good code review along the way. You even had a pen test in production just last week, a complete manual review, and nothing was found. And yet you wake up one morning and your application has been compromised. There's been no new deployment, there's been no server breach, there's been no admin access records, no security scans have failed, not a single file on the server has changed. So how did this happen? How were you compromised? I think it's important to note that security incidents today don't start with a vulnerability in your code necessarily, or a failure in your pipeline, or a penetration testing report you received last week. They can start with something you've already trusted. Vulnerabilities can be introduced into third parties without warning and undermine the security of an otherwise secure application. Attacks against third parties can yield a huge benefit to attackers by compromising many targets at once, and these have very real impacts. If you look at the likes of bucket compromises, these things can yield huge results. There's many sort of data records stored in these, or in many cases they're used for serving up static content on sites at the same time as well. They present a really juicy target for an attacker. All of this becomes a forgotten attack surface. It's important to acknowledge that third parties are part of your attack surface. Your application's functionality relies on dozens of third-party resources for analytics, marketing, user experience, payment gateways, and other APIs. It creates a massive blind spot. These external resources run with the same permission as your own application code and logic, creating a vast and unmonitored client-side attack surface. Attackers are exploiting this. Sophisticated attacks like MageCart inject malicious code into these trusted scripts and steal customer payment data directly from the browser. What do we mean by third-party services? When we're talking about third parties, we're talking about the things that you use in your application. So we're talking about file storage and content delivery networks. We're talking about lead tracking and SEO. We're talking about payment gateways, social media, blogs and online shopping, storage buckets. These are all service providers that many of you will be familiar and many that also you won't be. How many of you also operate internal CDNs for consistent user tracking across many applications? A breach in these services can have a huge impact. Not long ago, many UK councils and other organisations as well were caught in a Capita breach. You don't even have to be using these services directly. A breach in some of these services can result in leaking your data just as a result of a third party. And when I say huge impact, I mean really huge impact. Last year, hackers stole 1.5 billion in crypto from the Bybit digital exchange, and that was through a result of compromised JavaScript. So how is this happening? What are other tools missing? When we're talking about security, it's important to understand there are no silver bullets, and each security tool in your arsenal serves a purpose. It was designed to answer different security questions. They play an important role, but none are built particularly for continuous observability of third-party relationships inside live applications. When we're looking at infrastructure scanning and attack surface management, infrastructure scanning tools and attack surface management tools fundamentally answer the same question. What assets do we expose to the internet? They discover domains, IP addresses, services, cloud resources, and in the cases of EASM, they layer vulnerability detection on top of this inventory as well. It provides a valuable visibility into external reachable infrastructure and forgotten assets, but remains asset-centric and ownership-focused. These tools do not observe how applications consume or trust third-party services at runtime. They do not understand client-side execution or trust relationships inside those user sessions. When we're looking at things like traditional DAS tools test application endpoints for exploiting flaws and interacting with an application as a real attacker would do. They are effective in identifying weaknesses in application logic, authentication, input handling. However, they typically treat an application as a black box. They don't model trust relationships created or embedded by third-party scripts or external services that are dynamically executed inside the client. Again, they have a focus towards the application itself. We're not looking outside of the application. Scope is very important in security testing. Even when considering beyond DAS tools like AppCheck, our own capabilities extend way beyond traditional scanners, looking deep into CMS frameworks, fingerprint, and platform-aware testing with security flows and browser-driven behavior, rather than sort of simple request fuzzing. It results in excellent visibility, but again, our main focus is on your application and not everything around that application at the same time. Even with regular scheduling, it's still a point-in-time assessment. It's not continuously discovering and monitoring third-party services in production. And in this day and age, security needs to be continuous. When we're looking at modern cloud security posture management, CSPM tools, again, these tools inspect cloud environments for insecure configurations, excessive permissions, and policy violations within cloud accounts that you control. They provide a really strong posture management for owned infrastructure, but they stop at organizational boundaries. They're just looking at themselves within. They're not looking at external cloud services. They're not looking at other third-party resources, and they're not looking at the applications themselves at runtime. And while tools like software composition analysis cover this in a tiny way, again, they're looking at libraries during development and build time. They're identifying known vulnerabilities in a package before deployment. They're not tracking what's changed. It's essential for secure development, but it doesn't cover anything that's dynamically loaded. Any scripts, any external services, any third-party dependencies that are being introduced or modified in production. It's not uncommon for many CMS systems or even many package management systems to be dynamically injecting script tags inside an SPA application, and this all goes unseen. And this is where Trust Monitor fits in. It's there to provide continuous visibility into what your applications trust. It was specifically designed to fill this gap. It passively observes live applications to discover every third-party relationship, script, domain, API, cloud service, and monitors how much those relationships change, but also what level of trust is placed on each resource over time. Most security tools protect what you own. Trust Monitor exists to observe your application, how it actually interacts, and contextualize these relationships for what that means for your security posture. Before jumping into demo Trust Monitor, I think it's important to understand the levels of trust that we place in each of these resources. Visibility alone is not enough, and not all trusts are created equally. As mentioned already, modern applications don't operate in isolation. Even a simple page load triggers traffic to a wide variety of third-party services. Payment providers, CDNs, SaaS platforms, CMS systems, cloud hosting, analytics and marketing tools. Each one of these relationships exists for a different reason, but the browser treats them all the same, and they're all trusted by default. The important point is that every connection you see here represents a trust relationship. If any of these services are compromised or misconfigured, it can directly affect the security and the behavior of your application. Most organizations don't have an inventory or even a full inventory of these relationships, and many of them are dynamic. They change as teams add scripts, plugins, integrations, or new providers. Trust Monitor is designed to surface these relationships automatically so customers can see the real-world trust footprint of their applications and not just the parts they built themselves or the suppliers they think they have in the chain. An example here is of a client-side attack surface, and I really want to cement what we mean here. When a user loads a page, it doesn't necessarily talk to the organization's own server. It will reach out for additional services. And every single script tag that you have from a third party is doing that. What matters here is also the location of the script or service. It's not always obvious from the domain name. I think in the example I've got at the top here, we can see example.de, but it's actually coming from Russia. And I think from a compliance perspective, this is really important to cement as well. When we're doing our security assessments and we're doing our compliance questionnaires, is the data really going to where we say it's going? Trust Monitor maps all these relationships automatically. The goal here is to show you, the customer, that there is risk, not it isn't necessarily in the website they've built, but is in the external infrastructure that they see all around them. An important compliance question is just that, you've done your DD, what if things change? How do you know? The way Trust Monitor has been designed is a bit different from how our other services operate. So every one of these executes in production. And the way it starts with Trust Monitor is we start with an Apex domain. So what we're trying to do in Trust Monitor is not necessarily look at applications individually in isolation. We are wanting to use our discovery modules, as Ben mentioned previously, to find every application that you have in production. So we take a list of Apex domains, we feed those into the scope of Trust Monitor, and then we discover all the other domains that we have there at the same time as well. Once we discover an application, we then crawl an application. So we use the same technology that we use in our SPA crawling to go and identify all of the scripts that are being loaded in, all of the CSS, all the objects, iframes, embedded forms, any sort of external call that goes out to an external third party. From there, we observe the relationship and we give it a score based upon how that interaction works. And then we take it a step further at the same time. We then start to test these relationships as well, observing for vulnerabilities, and we'll go into the vulnerabilities in a bit more detail in a second. And then finally, we report. This is a continuous process. We want this to be a cycle. It's always on. So in talking about levels of risk, we've got essentially 5 levels of risk within Trust Monitor. So number 1, or the lowest level of risk, is no direct risk. This is usually a case of where there is just a mention of a third party. It's not directly linked. It's something we've identified either in text, or there is a new SPA-based component. So if you're using a framework like Vue or Angular and the relationship is difficult to determine, it will probably go into this category at the same time as well. There's no direct interaction happening, but we've seen a tag that we're not familiar with and have traced that. From there, we have a low level of trust, a low risk level of trust. Typically, this is hyperlinks. It requires a user to click on them. The risk of compromise here is the risk is transferred into the user's action, clicking the link and trusting an external site. I think it's really, really important to remember when we're talking about attacks, not all attacks are designed to attack you or your organization. Some attacks might use you to attack your users or even your employees. It's not uncommon at the start of a phishing campaign or a watering hole attack to do something like this, to look for links that are trusted and where that trust can be exploited. An attacker doesn't just lure a user anywhere. They wait for a user to visit a site they already trust and then run browser-side logic to dictate what to do next. I've included a link in here and we'll share the slides after this webinar at the same time to Beef. It's a pen testing tool we talk about occasionally, and that's designed for these sorts of waterholes attacks, and you'll be very surprised at what can come out of these. We then have medium, so moderate risk style attacks. So what's happening here is loading passive assets like images or style sheets. The compromise impact here is that a site can be defaced or can be used to mislead users. It falls short of full control, but that doesn't mean that it's not powerful. So while stopping short of full control, these defacement attacks are not uncommon. Often they make the news where there's a high-profile target or a political message. Usually they can be combined with other attacks to mislead users in the case of phishing. I think really interestingly right now is there's been a recent resurgence in sort of CSS, HTML invisibility tricks. For example, hidden malicious instructions inside emails to evade filters and content on sites. And we've also observed sites using these tricks as well, specifically to target AI agents. It's very interesting that these are making a bit of a comeback. Last time I saw many of these were in the mid 2000s, and it was all in the name of SEO. We then have a high level of trust where these relationships can present a significant risk. This is where we've got embedded functionality, so components like iframes, forms, objects from an external resource. An example as well might be a third-party request over CORS. The impact here can be significant on the parent application. Users inherently trust your content, especially if it uses your domain. Modern web applications, routinely embed functional UI components like this through iframes. Externally sourced forms or particular for payment gateways, authentication, support widgets, surveys, identity flows. These components are interactive, they accept user input, submit data, and often handle sensitive information like credentials or payment details. From a user's perspective, there is no distinction. The iframe is styled to match the site. The site runs inside the page, often loads from a trusted domain or subdomain. The impact of compromise here is if an iframe or a form is compromised, the impact's immediate and severe because users immediately trust it and it's part of your application. Attackers didn't even need to compromise your backend. They only needed control over the embedded component and the trust boundary has already been breached. It enables things like credential harvesting, payment skimming, session abuse, or silent redaction, all while the user believes they're directly interacting with you. Even when sandboxing is used, the attacker still controls what the user sees and what they enter, and that's often enough. I think it's important to understand as well that this was the type of attack that compromised Ticketmaster. It was a third-party payment iframe by an external vendor. The vendor was compromised, the attacker injected malicious code into the payment iframe, customers entered card details that appeared to be legitimate Ticketmaster checkout forms. The impact is obvious from there. Shopify also had issues around this at the same time as well with iframe abuse. Shopify apps were running inside embedded iframes within the merchant admin panels, and multiple incidents involve compromise of apps, harvesting credential details or injecting malicious UI. And then finally, we have the highest level of trust. So this is where there is third-party code like JavaScript interacting directly within the application. The impact of this is full compromise. There's full control over the user's page, allowing for data theft, session hijacking, or displaying malicious content. Compromise at this level means it's no longer your application. And there's some examples here I can talk through on this. So, at this point, an attacker would have full visibility and data access. A compromised script can read and manipulate anything that a user sees or can interact with. Form fields, DOM content, tokens stored in the browser of the application state. That includes full credentials if they're typed, or payment details, potentially personal data, any sort of client-side secrets or identifiers. It can lead to things like session hijacking or account takeover. If the application relies upon cookies, local storage, or browser tokens, that data can be accessed or exfiltrated. And once a session's stolen, the attacker doesn't even need the password anymore. They are the user. From there, full account takeover is often trivial. Going a step further from that, it can lead to application level control. We can control everything that happens within the application now. Change business logic, and all of this is invisible to the way the user is. If we've managed to steal credentials or if we've managed to steal a session, privilege escalation is often a potential from there at the same time as well. If compromised, the user has elevated privileges, from admin support or finance or engineering, the blast radius can expand rapidly. Attackers can use those credentials to access other services, create new accounts, change permission, extract sensitive data, or pivot to internal systems. At this point, it stops being an incident and starts to become an organizational breach. And going back to our example app here, we had our application, we deployed it. Our third-party CDN was compromised. And the next thing you know, we have a compromised application and nothing changed. And this isn't just a hypothetical. The consequences are real and severe. British Airways was fined 20 million by the ICO for an easily preventable data breach. This is the kind of thing that Trust Monitor could have stopped and identified. And beyond that, it happens to the best of us. Speaking of the ICO, they were compromised by a third-party breach at the same time as well. BrowserLoud was compromised and used to install a crypto miner. And what's important here isn't the breach, it's why existing controls didn't surface the risk beforehand. What does good look like for third-party risk then? To prevent this class of breach, organizations need capabilities that go beyond traditional scanning. We need continuous visibility of third-party execution. We need to know exactly which external scripts, services, domains, and APIs are executing inside our live applications. Not just what you deploy, but what actually runs in the user sessions. We need to prioritize by impact, not volume. Not all third parties represent the same level of risk. Teams need a way to understand how much each trusted dependency has, what compromises could cause real business damage. And of course, we need detection. Third-party risk often emerges when something changes outside of your control. A script update, a new domain, a misconfiguration. It's not when a CVE is published. This isn't about tooling choices yet. It's about what has to be true if you want visibility into this layer at all. With that in mind, let's have a look at what this actually looks like in practice. Should I switch to my demo application? Hopefully now everyone can see the AppCheck dashboard. If you're a customer already, something you're familiar with. If you're not, this is the sort of main AppCheck dashboard when you log in. When using Trust Monitor, there is a Trust Monitor module down the side, and the main entry point into Trust Monitor is through the Trust Monitor dashboard. So this is Trust Monitor. Quick overview of the dashboard. So what we have here is we have our, first of all, vulnerabilities across the top. I think it's really important to just make sure I convey here that as well as presenting these levels of risks and the reporting around them, there are very real vulnerabilities that are a result of these third-party relationships that Trust Monitor will identify and flag for you to investigate and mitigate. We show what your current risk score is and explain how that's built up. We show where your third parties are originating from in the world and what those relationships are. We can organize our third parties by the levels of trust that we have within them. We've got an overview of how many relationships we have, how many domains are monitored, and how many vulnerabilities we have overall. And then a quick view into what domains have vulnerabilities against them at this moment in time. We can drill into all of this information. So if I look at the example data here, I can see information on this domain, which is the AppCheck domain. I can see how many third parties we have, what countries are involved in that, and then who each of those third parties is. Our default view is to sort by vulnerabilities. We don't have any vulnerabilities in this one. But if I sort by trust level, I can then see where I've got highest levels of trust with third-party suppliers in there. If I then go to third parties, we can then get an overview of every third party that we have identified. And again, this isn't just from a singular application. This is from all your applications and the crawling that we've done to identify those and associate a level of risk against them. To assist with compliance and also just for sharing this information, there is a third-party suppliers report that you can pull from here at the same time, which will have each of these third parties in there, the level of risk associated, any details on vulnerabilities, country information, everything else. And we can also then drill into those in greater detail as well. So if I look at this example weather app, for instance, I can see that I've got 2 domains that are trusting this, and I can also see that there are vulnerabilities against this as well, and I can then drill into that in further detail. Speaking of the vulnerabilities, if I move on to the vulnerabilities page, this shows me all the vulnerabilities that we've identified as a result of a third-party relationship. So straight at the top here, we've got an unregistered domain takeover. If I have a look at this, it provides me with background and narrative around this. So if this third party was to be compromised, that gives us immediate control to be able to inject scripts into the target applications. And when we saw there as well, we have 2 applications that trust this third party. And again, all the usual details that you'd come to expect from AppCheck. So we provide full information on what it was. We provide full information on where it was compromised. Same workflows, note history at the same time as well. And then finally, one of the things that we've probably not mentioned, I've not covered on here, is the alerting around Trust Monitor at the same time as well. So right now we have no alerts configured. After our first scans have run, there is then a baseline that can be established. And once we've established a baseline, we can then start to set the alerts that we want to receive based upon what we've discovered. So for example, we can enable alerts on new trust levels that have entered. We can enable alerts on new vulnerabilities. We can enable alerts on new third parties. So the first time we discover a third party. When countries, specific countries enter the supply chain at the same time as well. You know, it might be against your policies to have anything from the Russian Federation, for instance, and you want to flag those relationships. An important one here when a geolocation changes. So when a third-party resource changes geolocation, it's probably something you want to be aware of. It's a risk you need to know about. When there's new geolocation alerts, so after you've got your baseline and you know what you look like, you know, has something changed? What's happened here? Domain expiration, perhaps one of the more active risks. So if you have a highest level trust and a domain is set to expire, that's becoming more imminent, and it's something that you want to be keeping an eye on. You know, I'm fairly sure everyone here has fairly good practices in terms of monitoring their own domains when they expire. How many of us actually monitor our third parties? And then finally, recently registered domains as well. When a recently registered domain shows up as part of a third party, it is usually a sign of something going a little awry. It's either you guys yourselves deploying something new, or it is a case of something has happened here. If I save those, we then get updated alerts on the dashboard, and we'll also receive email notifications on these at the same time when they change. Very quickly, there are a few reports within Trust Monitor that I'll quickly show off. So we have executive summaries available. So these will cover current posture, risk scoring methodology, what vulnerabilities we've got, a summary of the trusts, where our country presences are, and then just going through what third parties we've got in there as well at the same time. So that's nice and digestible. We have a series of new vulnerability reports. So we now have some interactive vulnerability reports at the same time, again, just making some of this easier to share between parties. So these are all interactive. You're able to go through and see the exact same details in here as you would in the main application. All of these reports can be built and filtered at the same time. And then finally, we have the, oops, if I can get to the control here. This little thing, stop, there we go. Then we finally got the in-depth Trust Monitor report at the same time as well. Now this goes into a large amount of detail about how we found these relationships, more detail on the vulnerabilities, impact analysis, and we can see here that we've got one where we have identified a secret that's been leaked, and I'll talk more about secrets leaking in a second and just explain what those are. Finally, as well, and I'll cover this in a bit more detail in the slides, we also have active monitoring. So Trust Monitor has essentially two parts of operation. So the first part is we perform OSINT. We identify all your applications, crawls applications, identify your third parties, identify the risks, and identify vulnerabilities. But there's also active monitoring to this at the same time as well, where we have identified, say, a payment page, and that requires additional scrutiny. You can set that to be actively monitored, and we'll perform checks every hour. So we'll make sure that the integrity of that hasn't changed. We'll make sure the content headers haven't changed, and we'll report when anything there does end up being altered and adjusted effectively. Should switch back to presentation. So I mentioned types of alerts there, but I thought it was probably worth just recapping again and going through these. So when there is an alert, there are several email notifications that can be sent out. So if there's a new vulnerability, we'll send a vulnerabilities detected email to who's on the list. Recently registered domains. So if there's a recently registered domain detected, that will be alerted at the same time as well. Domains expiring soon. Again, these are things that are potentially becoming imminent risks, especially if it's a highest level trusted relationship. There's also alerts around new relationships being detected, critical risk relationships being detected, and geolocation changes at the same time as well. I briefly touched on active monitoring, and active monitoring plays an important role in terms of compliance. So Trust Monitor provides continuous automated monitoring and auditable evidence to meet modern requirements and stringent mandates. We directly help you prove compliance, turning a difficult requirement into a simple process. This is pretty important in terms of PCI DSS4. A major component of PCI DSS4 is around monitoring payment pages, is around monitoring scripts, is around monitoring changes in security headers. ISO 27001:2022 as well has a large emphasis on managing digital supply chain and risk. Trust Monitor saves you a large job in here in terms of we go and find who your relationships are with your applications. You're not scrabbling around, and often, some of these relationships aren't what you expect at the same time. You've gone through and done supplier questionnaires for larger services that you've onboarded, but have you done the same thing for the smaller services, the things that have been included as a result of adding plugins to a CMS, for instance? But we provide you with a complete and auditable inventory. And in the event of the catastrophic, we help you avoid fines and reputational damage. We have the data to back up that you have been monitoring this and you have been reporting on this. And hopefully we don't end up in a situation like that. Just drilling into the mandate for PCI DSS4 more. So the requirements around here were reduced to combat some of this risk and threat. What's required to remain compliant? Well, to address this, organizations now must actively monitor scripts running on their payment pages, and their two key requirements. You must maintain a complete and accurate inventory of all scripts that are loaded and executed in the customer's browser or payment pages, and that includes justifying why each script is necessary for that to function. You must also deploy change and tamper detection mechanisms, and this system must be configured to alert personnel of unauthorized modification of HTTP headers and the contents of your payment pages, and protect the customer's browsers. The core goal here is to achieve foundational visibility and control of all payment pages and scripts. I think it's important to note as well that this isn't just it's not just about ASV scanning in this case. It's about continuous maintenance. It's crucial to understand these requirements are fundamentally different from a traditional point-in-time approved ASV scan. Point-in-time is periodic, usually quarterly, and it's a snapshot to your external vulnerabilities. In this environment, we're talking about dynamic change in third-party scripts. We're talking about dynamic change in third parties, where this change can happen at any moment. The compliance here is that we want to be doing continuous monitoring. It's not about having a system in place that it's about having a system in place that provides ongoing inventory, alerts, any unauthorized activity in real time, to monitor that integrity. We briefly touched on vulnerabilities, and I'm going to cover a few here at the same time as well, but Trust Monitor detects many types of vulnerability, from digital card skimming attacks. So this is a mage cart style attack. This occurs when attackers inject malicious tools into trusted code in your third party. So again, like payment gateways, analytics tools, and the goal here is to steal customer data directly from their browser during checkout. These attacks are, what led to the British Airways and Ticketmaster style breaches. Some of this is compromised and insecure JavaScript libraries to begin with. We look at the JavaScript libraries within your applications, but again, we're not really looking at third parties, and that's what Trust Monitor comes in at the same time as well. By using insecure components, we undermine the security of otherwise secure application. A compromise in a single sort of CDN or third-party provider can affect thousands of websites at once. And in some cases, this can be your own CDNs. There are many cases where we see organizations have a service for serving up static resources that is used in multiple applications. When these are compromised, the impact can be devastating. Leaked secrets in JavaScript. Now, this one is becoming more common. So server-side secrets such as API keys, database credentials, or cloud configuration details are accidentally leaked into JavaScript files sent to the user's browser. This has often been happening in modern application frameworks like Meteor.js or Nuxt. And the reason for this tends to be, and there are other reasons for these mistakes as well, but the reasons for these tend to be, these are polymorphic frameworks. So this is where client-side code and server-side code run in the same code. And there's an increase in the number of mistakes where developers are essentially shipping secrets that are meant to be server-side, and they're turning up client-side because of a poor understanding of these frameworks. We've seen things already along the lines of Kubernetes API keys embedded into these things, so that's complete control of your stack and your cluster. We've seen things like Stripe payment gateways with full admin access credentials embedded inside JavaScript. We've seen things like just API keys being leaked, where traditionally you would have done all this on the server side, whereas with these sorts of frameworks, it's been leaked into client side. And that's not, not always the case. It doesn't always have to be a polymorphic framework either. Sometimes as well, it can just be a case that for reasons, the development team has gone down the path of making an API call from there. And then domain and subdomain takeover. This happens when applications reference a domain or subdomain that's no longer in use or expired, or points to a deprovisioned cloud service. It's fairly easy for an attacker to register the orphan domain, to hijack it and allow them to host malicious content, steal data, launch phishing attacks, either under your name or against you at the same time. And cloud storage misconfigurations, incorrectly configured cloud storage, such as public Amazon S3 buckets, can expose vast amounts of sensitive data. Attackers can also exploit this as well, where write permissions exist on the files, used to deface websites or plant malware. Again, this is the sort of technique that the MageCart campaigns used and compromised 17,000 websites just by attacking S3 buckets. And again, this is just where Trust Monitor comes into this. We're making the invisible attack surface visible. Trust Monitor is fully automated and passive discovery platform. It continuously crawls your web assets to map every single third-party dependency, not just scripts, but domains, cloud services, and all your existing relationships. And I think it's really important here to remember you can't protect what you can't see. Trust Monitor eliminates this massive blind spot created by third-party code, discovering shadow IT risks from unmanaged marketing tags to forgotten dev integrations that manual oversight often misses. This is foundational visibility that's a prerequisite to any effective security or control policy. And just going back to our example here, what we're looking for here is we're seeking sort of a single source of truth of how external third parties in your applications make up a part of your attack surface and the risks you're exposed to. We want to avoid vulnerabilities biting you. It's really important, again, to remember there are no silver bullets in security. The first step in all of this is awareness, just as the first vulnerability is in the asset you didn't even know existed. Trust Monitor is a complementary weapon to add to your arsenal to keep on top of threats to our businesses, ensuring that we don't end up compromised as seen in the examples we've gone through. Because unfortunately, in the real world, when this happens, it's unlikely to be a visual high-impact attack like we're seeing on our example application here. It's going to be quiet, it's going to be unseen, it's going to be invisible, and you won't know it until it's too late. It took BA 3 months to become aware of their incident. So on that note, remember, AppCheck is here to help you no matter where you are in your security journey. Thank you very much for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions.